I'm going to speak of the third subtopic in the April 2019 series of online meetings on Patrick Lecture 162, Three Levels of Reality. Now, the first week we talked generically about this approach. In the second week, we talked about what we actually believe. In the third week, we're talking about level 2, or we talked about level 2, what actually exists. What I noticed in the meetings, what I personally experienced and I noticed in the meetings, is that there is a strong resistance, a reluctance to exit what we believe and look at alternative realities. Alternative meaning that what we believe seems like a all-encompassing reality. It's not, but it feels that way. And looking at other possibilities, other realities, feels as if we're abandoning our point of view. It also opens and exposes our point of view to new information that would change it. And this is the real source of the resistance, is that if I listen to a possible other reality, I may have to admit that my reality is not complete, that it may be prejudiced, that it may be subjective, rather than the truth. So first of all, there's a resistance to leaving behind the world of what I believe exists. The first question that I asked in the study guide was, or what I suggested, was that you look at, do you actually want to see? So anticipating resistance, I thought it was a good exercise to invite people to consider, do we really want to see? There was a talk given by a pathwork helper, senior pathwork helper, Carolyn Tylove of the Philadelphia Pathwork, years and years ago when I was still a trainee, that I really enjoyed. She was teaching how to read a lecture. And at that moment in time, I was struggling with some aspects of the lectures. And in her talk, she said, you need to stop reading when you come across a point of resistance. Now, that's an example of intellectually you would do that. But the reality is very subjective. The reality can be very emotional. And the example that she gave was that some days she would read "Greetings, my dearest friends," which is often how the guide began the lectures, and she would pause because she was in resistance to that idea. At that particular time, 25 odd years ago, I was so ecstatic to hear this because I was in that place. I was in a place where I resented, resisted, had trouble with that simple phrase, "Greetings, my dearest friends." There was a feeling of being called in and included that rubbed me the wrong way. And to hear someone else who was a recognized leader in the pathwork say, I hesitate on that too sometimes, made me feel normalized. It made me feel that there was some, not validity, not that I'm right, but that I was feeling a feeling that wasn't horrible, negative, something that needed to be erased. And what she explained is that if you can read that and you go into resistance, you're not really present with the next sentence. So the summary of her teaching on how to read a lecture was read until you get stuck, until you hesitate, until you pause, until you hit a knot in what you're reading. And that's your work for the day. Now, that would make for slow reading. That's true. It's an ideal, but it's a very useful way of understanding the lectures, of approaching the lectures. So again, that's why I thought I would ask the question, do you really want to know what the reality is? Attempting to invite people to see that they are not interested today. And if you're not interested today, then today's not the day to look for what actually exists. Because if you're not willing to see it, you're not going to have a clear view of it. The next quote I gave in the study guide was this, that truth is never, never anywhere near as threatening as the foggy half-truths and evasions, no matter what they are. There's a sense of relief when you take a look at what really exists. Let's go back to the example of Carolyn. I had never verbalized this to anyone, that I was in resistance to this phrase, to this inclusivity. I wouldn't have known how to discuss it. I wouldn't have felt like a mature adult saying, I don't like this. When I hear someone else saying they also feel that way, even on occasion, I felt such relief that there was a larger reality where every once in a while a loving phrase just hits you the wrong way and you're not able to take it in. And instead of feeling that I was bad for this, I could say that's how I felt that day. I could see it as a momentary, even if it happened for several weeks in a row, relative to a longer period of time, that's momentary. And once I saw it as momentary, something that I could move through, other people had moved through it, I could move through it. There was a sense of relief, the truth, that sometimes people resist something that has no negative intent, that is a loving phrase, it relaxed me a great deal. So again, truth is never, never anywhere near as threatening as the foggy half-truths and evasions, no matter what they are. So to first ask yourself, am I interested in knowing what really exists? Then for the rest of the study guide for this week, I recounted a section I found at the end of the lecture that was part of the question and answer section. Now, I used the unedited or earliest printed versions of the lectures, so I have all the questions that were recorded. Not all were, but I have all that were recorded. They are not always in the edited versions that are available for free on the internet. But in this particular section, someone asked a question. They said, I have this problem, and I think it's about them, but I'm not sure. And the guide suggested 3 questions. He said, number 1, to ask what you really feel. Now, that's not the same as what you believe. What you really feel is what actually exists. What you believe is, I was insulted, for instance. I was wronged. But what you really feel, maybe I was slighted. I wasn't seen. I resented their authority over me. It's a little different, but it's different enough. So it's part of what actually exists, what we really feel, instead of what we want to feel or how we want to characterize how we feel. So what do you really feel? And then comes the hard part. What do you believe the other person feels towards you? That's actually far more complicated a question than it sounds. Basically, what the guide is suggesting is stand in their shoes for a second. How do they see you? Now, for instance, I don't think of myself as an imposing person. I'm short and I'm casual. So I don't see myself as a formal, authoritative, kingly kind of person. But that doesn't control how other people see me. Someone else can see me from a completely different perspective that is based on their history, their understanding, their perception, their beliefs, their judgments. It's a very complicated soup as to how they see me. So I see myself a certain way, someone responds to me a certain way, and I'm integrating it into my understanding instead of saying, but what is their understanding? What do they see? Who are they? What are they looking for? Because their response is based upon them as much as, if not more than, it is based upon me, a response to me, a reflection of me. So when you ask the question, what do you believe the other person feels towards you? It invites you to go outside yourself, which is the point of the exercise, is to get some distance between what you believe and what you feel, and to see that there may be another reality going on. Here's an example. It is very common that we are raised, when we are very small, that we have a person in charge of us at some point, whether it's a parent or a relative or a babysitter or someone. We have someone in charge of us who is very domineering and strong. And we are physically tiny. So they don't have to be very domineering, and they don't have to be very tall to feel like the giant is angry and we don't know what to do and we are defenseless. We can build that up in our minds based upon our doubts about ourselves. I'm not adequate. I'm not enough. I was bad. I was good and I was not seen. All these are from our perspective. But the question is about what was going on with them. What did they believe? And just as I'll just pick a few examples. If this very strong, domineering person was seeing you as someone they could dominate, then they certainly weren't looking at you as an individual. They were not looking at your characteristics. They were not looking at your charm, your gifts. They were looking for an opportunity to dominate. And they were attempting to exercise their ability to dominate another person. This is about them. It has nothing to do with you. So perhaps you can see where the perception that you have of being smashed, of being attacked, of being bullied is valid. It is true. And yet the reality may be that the other person never really saw you. It wasn't about you personally. It was more about their frustrations, their repressed feelings, their desire to feel important. And they were simply acting out on you. No differently than if a car hit you that wasn't being driven by anyone, would simply be an event where you were hit by something. And so when we personify what we were hit by, we are doing it from our subjective viewpoint. Now, when it comes to a father or a mother or a close relative, it does feel more personal. And yet the reality of an adult operating in an adult world is that they do not always take into account the perspective of a young person that they are taking care of. And even if they do most of the time in a particular circumstance, they may simply act out on a child. This would happen many, many times for it to be an event in your life. And as we grow up, we may be understanding of the stresses of that person. And at the same time, we keep the belief there must have been something wrong with me. So this exercise, the 3 levels of reality, is partly about creating some distance, some separation between what we have come to believe and what may actually have been happening. And the fact that the two happen simultaneously does not make them necessarily connected. Then the next question the guide asks is for you to consider why. So if a babysitter acts out on me, and they bully me, and they deride me, and they make me feel ashamed, why would they do that? When we start considering what is motivating another person instead of the effect upon us, we can gain some empathy for what would drive a person to bully, what would drive a person to ignore the feelings of another person, what would drive another person to prefer one child over the other. That motivation would come from their relationship with their parents and be acted out upon us. The question of why does that person feel that way towards you, or why does that person feel that way, is another way to create some space between my experience and my beliefs and what may be happening in the outside world. It's not that we're not affected by the outside world, The lecture is about trying to create a triangulation here. This is what I believe. This is what I feel. This is what happened. And these are the forces that were involved in that happening. And then there is the possibility. This is where in the fourth week we'll look at what is possible. And what is possible is that when we approach the world from a less subjective point of view, we see things differently. When we accommodate, when we include the feelings of another person. So that's a brief summary of week 3 of Pathwork Lecture 162. Thanks.